Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. It's great to be here. My name is Dr. B, Dr. B Addiction Recovery. The topic I want to discuss today is what are the roots of substance abuse? Many people ask me this quite often. The tongue-in-cheek answer that's on everybody's verbiage and radar nowadays in this community is trauma, trauma, trauma. I worry that not only do people really get the extent of what that means, but they don't even get it at the superficial level at times. So what I want to do today is dig into that and do a little deep dive in just one carved out section of this major event that is called childhood development. The more technical term for it, of course, is ACEs, Adverse Childhood Events, study done at Kaiser in the 90s. Adverse childhood experiences have an additive effect, and you have a whole host of outcomes that are just toxic and nasty. Everything from autoimmune diseases, smoking, intellectual, cognitive development issues, depression, cancers, I don't know if I said that, learning disabilities, problems with the law, etc., etc., etc. And so it's sort of the buzzword nowadays, okay? But in the substance abuse community, everybody sort of calls it trauma, okay? I want to take a small portion of time, the traditional benchmarks of childhood development, early childhood development, and look at the time, early 2-3 years old. I don't really subscribe to these periods completely. They're absolutely very good, but because I think it's much more complex than that. But separation and individuation in early childhood, when the child needs to separate from the maternal figure and go on his own, and take a look at how that occurs, and in the context of that, evaluate what is trauma and really give you a visceral, deep understanding of it and how it could lead into substance abuse. Most of the stuff I'm going to discuss have been developed, tested, laid out, discussed by much greater minds than mine, all the way back to Freud, Winnicott, Theodore Miller, Ashgar, Sam Bachman, he deserves his due, Otto Kernberg. A lot of these guys work with personality issues, disorders, but through evaluating their literature and output, one can say quite a bit about. Oh, let me clarify also, it's not that adverse childhood events in an additive way cause some of those bad outcomes like autoimmune diseases. They're just a very, very significant correlation, which is a whole different topic, but I don't want you to think I was saying, okay, it's going to cause it, it's a direct relationship, and that's it. And that's confusing and not correct. Okay. To get into this early childhood, at the root of what we are really discussing here, okay, at the root of what we're really discussing here is, in those periods, is the formation, I guess what Freud would call the ego, okay, or the self, or getting an understanding of I, me, okay? In addition to that, what does that mean, okay? And all of this is going to become very clear for you in a second. In addition to that, what does that mean? Formation of the ego, me, the physical me, the mental me. Well, obviously, for the most part, we're talking about a mental construct, a psychological construct. What that really means is how I perceive myself. What do you think pathological narcissists, at times sociopaths, antisocial, whatever you want to call it, histrionics, borderlines, people in a dissociative state, some of the cluster A stuff as well, schizoid, and even cluster C stuff, neuroticism, disassociation, okay? What do you think those things have to do with? I'm using these because they're very intimately related to the healthy formation of the self, and if things go wrong. But I want to use this to you because I want to show you that the healthy formation of the self does have to do with time, does have to do with meaning, does have to do with the context of my relationship to others and the narrative I tell myself. For example, if you notice, a pathological narcissist is often in a situation or a state where they are in this groundhog's perpetual life of confabulating from day to day to day. For them to be able to confabulate because for whatever reason that is going on in their life, they really are unable to face the reality of who they are, the dismal reality of who they are, their failures, maybe some of their accomplishments. This is a really compensatory mechanism to avoid pain and shame. It's intolerable. For them to be able to do that, there has to be, one of the things that you'll want the guys that are in the know really understand is they have no capacity to learn anything, right? And so there's no memory of anything. There really isn't in certain situations. And as they move through the world, since they learn nothing and they can't pick up anything from their mistakes and move forward, they're also in a situation where they have to continuously confabulate to play a role. That's taxing. That's exhausting. But for you to be able to do that, you're also ascribing and telling a narrative of your life that is untrue because you can't face the reality of what the situation is. Okay, so there's narrative. Okay, the self can't cope. In fact, I do agree with the fact that in particular narcissism is an absence of self versus what is the self. But they can, they have a false self of some sort, but they can't cope with the reality of the situation. They have to regularly confabulate, speculate on what may have happened, create a new narrative. That narrative gives them meaning in who they are and their relationship with the external world. In addition, for them to be able to give that narrative, they have to completely ignore time, how they see it, how they process it, how they are able to place events at different times, moving back and forth, take a little piece here, take a little piece there, give a little bit of narrative here. And in fact, this need is so potent, can't recall his name, a sociologist came up with it, and Sam Bachman also discusses it. It's conversational narcissism, right? It's very toxic. I'm not interested in conversational narcissism here. I am interested in trying to explain to you that mental health issues, if you're going to consider substance abuse one of those, and I started off by describing, telling you that I'm going to describe healthy separation and individuation, which really has to do with the healthy formation of the ego or the self. And what that really means is constructing meaning, understanding, processing who you are in relationship to the objects around you and the narrative that you build around your life and those around you. And this is also intimately related with your processing and concept of time. Moved from there, gave you an example of a pathological narcissist, amongst, I could have given you some other ones, to show you how every one of those issues, meaning, narrative, time, and your view of others, are all intimately related and are very much wound up mental health issues. Now let's move to the next one. Healthy individuation, separation. Like birth of a planet, like the growth of a planet. It's a good analogy. This is the time where the kid needs to be pushed out to realize that he is an independent person. Like the birth and development of an early heavenly body. This process is cataclysmic. It is frightening. In some ways, it's a horror show. The kid needs to be pushed out by the maternal figure across a lake of fire on a thin bridge in his mind to a dark cave on the other side, and he has to make this passage. One way or another, the kid has to make this passage. The kid doesn't want to go. Right? It's scary, okay? And sometimes maternal figure may actually be pathologically holding on to the child. In fact, the child might sometimes be brave and be trying to get pushed to have that individuation, and the pathological mother might be holding on. In fact, it's one of the ways you can really destroy all kinds of boundaries, family boundaries, relationship boundaries, physical boundaries, future for that child. But in general, the child is afraid to go and doesn't want to let go. And in a pathological situation, the mother doesn't want to let go. This could be really bad news. But in a healthy situation, the mother, the father, whatever, they should push the child away. At the same time, these figures need to be incredibly sober-minded and strong themselves, because they don't want to let go either. And they need to be strong and in a healthy, sober-minded way push that kid off and have this delicate balance and dance of reeling back in, letting go, reeling back in, letting go. Eventually, this needs to develop into you are you. You are allowed your boundaries. You do not owe me anything, but find meaning back here in the homestead with me and him or her. We will always love you, support you, be somebody that you can trust, and let's have you derive meaning of yourself through this relationship and bond that we have, and you develop your identity, self, ego, meaning, choices. When this doesn't, now that was about as short as you can put this, and it's Dr. B's sort of version of. Now keep in mind also a lot of theorists, I think it was Piaget, one of the child psychologists, always said the concept of you just have to be a good enough mother, because the individual human being is strong. Okay, it's got a will to survive in the healthiest way it can. Who knows what the absolute perfect separation individuation is, but a lot of people can make it. I want to reemphasize the intrapsychic demand that this separation individuation imposes on a child cannot be overstated. In addition, you got to understand there's a physical demand too. Your immune system is probably developing and building during this time too, because this is an inflammatory situation. So once it's done, at that point, what have you created in an ideal situation? And please understand, I'm really doing a lot of generalizations, and it's not that they're wrong, but the point here is to take a really big, complex topic, and I'm relating medical, physical, psychological, and social, and wrapping it up into one in a few short minutes here, okay? So the outcome of this should be, okay, so what? Why is all this important? Healthy separation, individuation, healthy formation of the self. Why is it important? Because it's everything to who you are to avoid death, and not always in the physical sense. Let me use the analogy of the narcissist again. The pathological narcissist forms what they refer to as a false self. Why? You gotta have something to anchor to, so that is what they use both in terms for utilizing it as a defense mechanism, and to be able to operate in the world. Now it just happens, since it's a false self, to have a false sense of themselves. They ascribe false narratives to themselves. They have a complete whacked out sense of time. They engage in magical thinking, confabulation, and they also have absolutely no empathy. By the way, I ascribe to the school of thought, the guys that are arguing for cluster B with overlays and underlays, as Sam Bachman puts it. But all of that being said, that healthy formation is what is your toolbox to grow into the world and slowly separate from your mother and father and your paternal figures, whatever they may be. Hopefully they're healthy, and usually they're not in our society, and then eventually be completely severed from them and on your own. In fact, our society is so complex. You have the teen years, okay? In certain societies, you turn 13, your libido works, you know how to hunt, you know you can create a child, you have a ceremony, you are now a man. Western society is so complex, and modern society is even more complex, And in fact, it's so toxic. You need the teen years, which we kind of think of and mark as the bridge of that kind of final letting go from your family, your parents, your parental figures into adult. Now, a person that is pathological and has failed to appropriately go through this stage, and a person has been, throughout their other stages, unhealthy events have happened, whether the toxic relationships around them and the toxic input into who they are, forming from a child to a small child, middle child, grown child, and an adult. These are additive, and who they are forming as, sometimes they're not aware of it because it's interesting. That's all they know. If you're in a constant state of anxiety, if you're in a constant state of panic, if you're in a constant state of depression, if you feel crappy about yourself, you may not even really know because that is all you know and it seems normal. What do you guys think? Let's use, let's use Johnny Depp, right? He kind of points out to drugs as a way for him to hide. In fact, I am going to speculate from what's been said out here that is potentially a person whose separation, individuation, and then constant assault from his mother was so taxing on him, he has spent his whole adult life in a state of anxiety and hiding from the world and looking for a maternal figure to anchor to, otherwise hiding. Why do you have 50 houses? Why do you dress the way you do with so many layers of clothing, the sunglasses, the mysteriousness, and eventually you run into another pathological figure who had really high narcissistic traits that entrapped you, and in there you wanted to hide in that person's womb, and it turned out to be a freaking disaster. Let me use another analogy. And I used this once before. I said, look, a kid in high school, in fact, I'm going to say this, during the high school years or teenage years when there's that teenage rebellion and angst that we often refer to and think of normal, I would say it's not really all that normal at all. It just happens that we, for the most part, very few people can pull off completely perfect, healthy child rearing, and some of that comes out in years that you're very vulnerable to and becoming aware of the world looking at you, and that can make you very uncomfortable. But let's take a kid who goes to a high school party and he sees the cool kids around the corner, they're all doing dope. He really wants to be accepted and validated. Why? Because I would argue that it hasn't been brought to fruition, his sense of self. That is the responsibility of the caretakers at home to give to him, so he finds meaning, validation, and sense of self in a way where he has confidence to be out there in the world. So he goes over there, does the drugs, and then once he does the drugs, something else happens where he finds more warmth because now he has lost his anxiety, his depression, his angst, his sense of detachment from himself, and this can lead to trouble. Now, I had somebody once tell me, I went and did drugs because I wanted to do drugs because it feels good. And my response is, bullshit. Some of this stuff is subconscious. Some of it is in forefront of your consciousness. But I have another question for you. I couldn't ask it because it was on social media. Is this. You said, I did drugs because it felt good, right? Because I wanted to feel good. And my question to, and then I got addicted, and my question to that person is, well, do you feel bad that you needed to feel good? And you're going to do something that could destroy your life and kill you? I went up to the average person and said, let me throw you off a 30,000 feet moving airplane, and in fact I'll give you an oxygen mask and a tank because you can breathe comfortably and really feel good because that dopamine's going to be kicking, man. How many people are going to do it without a parachute? Not very many. Are you telling me that being alive and being yourself doesn't feel good? So whether it's subconscious, whether it is interpreted correctly by the individual, whether it was all completely that separation, individuation, and then all of the other additive trauma, something is off. And when that substance hits you, there's a euphoria they often talk about. The euphoric, but it's not euphoric. If you talk to a lot of people that get hooked on dope, in particular opiates, they will tell you that they felt good, safe, confident, calm, and able to go out into the world for the first time in their life. That is supposed to be healthy childhood development, which is the responsibility of the mother. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that gives you some insight. I hope it generates a discussion. You can start it below. I hope some of you disagree with me. You can write your comments below. But this is really at the most visceral level a description, a global description of what really trauma is. It doesn't have to even be very blatant overlay of physical or emotional abuse, right? It could be so subtle throughout your childhood. For example, some people might be coming up in a very bizarre cluster B family, okay? And their whole world view, well, initially their whole view of themselves, and hence the development of the self, and hence their relationships with the world is going to come out skewed. Hopefully there's someone there to catch them. If you want to invest in our future, invest in our children and propagate healthy upbringing. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that Patreon thing, and see you guys soon.